Hi, everyone. We're going to get started. It's so nice to see folks joining us, joining their roots, and I'm really, really excited for this panel. And we're going to actually get started because we have lots of exciting ground to cover. So as our panel is joining us, I'll introduce myself, and the panel will introduce themselves in a little bit. My name is Pam Campos Palma. I served in the military as an intelligence analyst, enlisted out of high school, and have been organizing predominantly around progressive foreign policy for several years. I'm also proudly the daughter of Honduran immigrants, a queer woman, and I lead Vets for the People, an organizing project through the Working Families Party. I started organizing in the military, is what I often say, when I saw injustices, when I saw my peers facing workplace issues. And I joined the movement through the immigrant rights movement. And for several years now have really been invested in organizing and the leadership development of military veterans who are committed to change, to transformative change as a means to end the corrupt war economy that we live in. Veterans have been change agents throughout history, right? From Cesar Chavez to Medgar Evers, to many others that we don't know. And yet, at the same time, military veterans and what many of us like to call plastic patriotism has long been tooled for everything from selling cars to propping up conservative judges to trafficking white supremacist warmongering. And it's not new for us to see nationalism disguised as patriotism with both political parties, mainstream parties, using vets as props. And just for some context before we dive in, the timeliness of this panel is relevant. On June 1st, right, this is not new, and the escalation of the use of nationalism and patriotism and chest pounding of vets to propel that agenda, right? On June 1st, the commander-in-chief, the sitting commander-in-chief, goaded governors to use the National Guard, namely against Black Lives Matter protesters and the anti-fascists that he's targeting, right? A few weeks ago, time is a blur, but a few weeks ago, this commander-in-chief announced a counterinsurgency operation into American cities, again, using militarism, hypernationalism, jingoism to target Black and brown communities. And in all of this, we have to ask, where are progressive veterans? Do we not exist? Are we not real? And we do exist, right? But there has been a gap for far too long between movements, contemporary movements, and our community, and the dynamism of power that belongs in the modern day anti-racist, anti-fascist military veteran that's committed to change. So with that, we're gonna kick off our panel. I'm honored, humbled, joyful to be able to be in this conversation with people that I really admire, vets that I deeply appreciate. And with that, I'll kick it off for everyone to introduce themselves. We're missing Sean for the moment, but he's joining us temporarily. But we'll just have folks introduce themselves. So share a little bit about your story, your military experience, and your work. All of the folks on this panel have run for office, have been movers and builders for change. And so with that, we can start with Arti.
Hi, everybody. My name is Arti Walker Padacotla. I am a U.S. Army veteran. I served in the Army for 6 years, from 2000 to 2006. I'm also an elected official, a local elected official. I was elected to local office in 2019, and I am a progressive, and I'm one of the only progressives really on my board. And we are pushing for issues in Oak Park right now that are deeply connected to militarism in the United States, such as defunding the police, getting the police out of our schools, reimagining our public budgets so that we don't spend so much money on police. Oak Park, just for context here, Oak Park is a municipality of about 50,000 people in the state of Illinois, and we have either the second or third largest police force per capita in the state of Illinois. We spend $25 million on policing in the village of Oak Park. So this is probably going to be a larger thread in the conversation, but why is it that we spend so much money on the military and police in America? So I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Pam, for having me.
Awesome. Carrie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carrie Evelyn Harris. I am an activist and a political strategist in the state of Delaware nationally. I work on any issue that centers people. My big focus has been healthcare. I believe universal healthcare is going to be the stepping stone to making sure that everybody has their basic needs met and they can participate more fully in our democracy, because at least that piece is taken care of. I'm a United States Air Force veteran, was medically retired in 2008, and I joined 3 months before 9/11. A lot of people think that veterans join the military for patriotism and all that. I joined for an education, and then 9/11 happened. So, and during that time, I saw what it meant, and as many veterans did, to be at war and the destruction that comes with it, both literally in country and then what we carry with us for the rest of our lives, and what other veterans carry. And I can only imagine what the citizens of the nations that we deploy our troops with too feel. And to know especially why we went to war in the Middle East, what that, and knowing that it was a lie. And that we were kept being told we support the troops, and it was just this false sense of pride when we really were just destroying. And it really made it so that I was prepared to come back and work to create the country that we need to create, placing diplomacy over conflict, saving the lives of people, because regardless of what happens overseas, in the United States, it's usually the essential class that join the military. And when we go overseas, it's the essential class of those countries that die. And it made it very clear to me that we have to stop this type of thing. And I'm sure my fellow panelists can back me up. When you go overseas, people still, well, then they still look to America as the place, right? The place to be, the country to look up to. And then you would personally know the brokenness of our country. And I am determined, and I know the panelists here are determined to make this the country that the rest of the world used to think we are, but our current president has exposed the truth. And I think I'm excited, and I know that there are other veterans that aren't on this panel who are ready to make this, this country right.
Amazing. We're having a tech issue with Sean, but I think we can hear him. So if the host, oh, there he is. Right on time.
Can you guys see me?
Go ahead, Sean.
Can you guys see me? Yeah. Okay.
We see your name.
You see my name, but you can't see my face. Okay.
No, but
anyways, we'll figure that out. All right, that's fine. You guys will see me eventually, I hope. But anyways, thank you for having me on. My name is Chowdhury, and I've been campaigning for the last almost 2 years now, so it feels good to finally do a panel where I'm not a candidate. But I was running for Congress here in New York 5, which is in South Jamaica, Queens, and part of Long Island. And I served 6 years in the Marine Corps, the field radio operator from 2011 to 2017. And, I enlisted just because I needed help. I needed education, housing, healthcare, and unfortunately, the military industrial complex provided me that. In a world where we should be providing these resources to children, I believe that that experience alone has really showed me that our children in this world deserve better opportunities. And having gone through that, I started organizing in the middle of my service just because I see how impactful climate change is to our planet. I see how detrimental housing is. I live in public housing, so I see, as someone who is a public housing tenant, that a lot of working class people their needs are not being met. And I feel like we don't necessarily need to enlist in the military to receive the benefits. So here we are. I think that in a time like this, in a very crucial time, this 2020 election coming up in November, I think it's really upon a lot of veterans trying to find their space and their voice where we could utilize it and use our tool, right? Our experiences, not just from being in service, but our working class experiences. I think that a lot of panelists here, and for folks who are not even on here, have really unique lives, right? Growing up, a lot of us grew up poor. A lot of us came from like immigrant families, and we've been marginalized. We know what it's like, and I think that military bond does, bring us together in a way. But I think that going forward now, we've got to try to figure out what we can do to bring working class experience as veterans, and create a space for all of us to ensure that we could be the change that we want to see.
Amazing. Thank you all. I mean, it's when I actually talk to vets, it's a very similar thing, which is I enlisted because of a variety of things, not just this like blind adulation, American exceptionalism story that is often told. I also, when you talk to different kinds of vets, you also hear that, yes, matters of war and peace are complicated. And also, if you actually talk to vets, you actually hear about these contradictions that we hold that have informed so much of our experience, that create this dynamism and a systems analysis that we bring to then our work. And I also think that, especially in the post 9/11 cohort of military veterans, there is also a very big divide around entitlement, right? Does service mean entitlement? And, I'm shade, but no shade, but shade around, the vets that are like, I'm going to make a rifle coffee company that sells guns and violence and hooah. Like, there is this monopoly around that kind of veteran, the veteran that is like red, white, and blue bald eagle, Trump, supporting. And so what room does that really leave for the breadth, the complicatedness, the abundance of the rest of us, right? Who see service in its most basic form, right? Which is truly serving the people. No matter why you served, no matter what you were told, at the end of the day, we all served because we believed in a contract that said that we were in service of other people like ourselves. And I still talk to, regardless if vets are like, I never want to do anything with the military vets, or if they're still claiming their veteran status, I always hear from vets, I believed in that, even if I was lied to. And that's why I organized today. And so I want to move us to the next question for all of you, actually, which is, when we think about the progressive movement, right? What are some of the misconceptions or tropes about veterans that you have faced, or that you have seen, or that you think are damaging? And we'll start actually with Sean, because you said something really important. I think you shared a story during our conversations before the panel that I'd love to uplift.
Yeah, sure. I remember actually when I first was transitioning from my service into the movement space. This was my first campaign opportunity working for AOC, and I remember meeting so many cool folks, but they were kind of shocked to see a veteran in a space like this, because they're like, oh, you served in the Marines out of all branches, like, and you're progressive, like, how does that work? And I think that it was definitely a shocker and eye-opener for a lot of folks to see that, yeah, a lot of veterans, we're not this monolith, we're not this group of people that you see on CNN, and starting up a coffee rifle company, and we're not that, we're not all about, protecting the Second Amendment and all that. We have different experiences, and I think that we really kind of respect that from one another. So it's been kind of hard for me, even though it's been a few years already. I'm still trying to figure out how I could best utilize my position and trying to bring in more veterans to feel comfortable to speak up. So it's been hard, and I'm still trying to figure that out, especially in my own community, where we have a lot of veterans who are coming back from service, or who've served for a very long time and are now just getting back into, trying to give back to the communities. So I think that we do have a path going forward, but it really is going to take a lot. It's going to take a collective effort from all of us. So.
Pam, I think you're on mute.
Oh, I was just saying, Artie or Carrie, if you have thoughts on tropes or misconceptions progressives have about veterans.
Yeah, I can say a couple things. One, to piggyback off of what Sean said, you know, we've had conversations before about how when you're a progressive, and you mentioned your military service, I happen to serve under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I'm gay, and this is who I am. But it was something I had to cover. When you come into the progressive arena, right, after service, it almost feels like a coming out, right? When you'll be in progressive circles, and people will speak about things happen, even when it comes to military budgets, and it's this awkwardness about saying, oh yes, I was in the military, and then people say, oh, you were, because it's just, there's this hesitation, and you don't want people to paint you with a certain brush that just doesn't fit your experience or your belief system. The other thing is, outside of that, there's this narrative that just permeates our country that to support the troops, it means that you have to support whatever conflict they're in, right? And I would say that most veterans, even conservative ones, will say, if you speak out against something that you don't agree with, that doesn't mean you don't support the troops. It's saying that particular conflict is wrong. And then, in fact, I would even double down and say, if you do call out that conflict, you're willing to save lives, right? You're doing something that we in many ways are prohibited from doing as serving members, whereas the public can fight for us and say, this isn't right. We need to bring our troops home. We need to protect our troops. We need our budgets to be troop centered and not contract centered, things like that. And that is a huge difference in what it really means to support the troops. Thank you for your service doesn't cut it at the end of the day. When our children are born at higher levels than the general population with disabilities, when we're still fighting to get the disability ratings that we unfortunately left the branches of service with, when our spouses are unable to find regular employment because they followed us from station to station, and so they're a bit behind on their ability to start careers, the budget needs to reflect those who are serving and not those who want to be served.
Damn, that hit me in the bones. Arti, your thoughts?
I mean, I think my thoughts are directly everything that Carrie said. And I think for me, it's my personal experience is I don't claim my veteran status at all. Like, it's almost like there's this shame that goes along with it, because I very much like Carrie, I joined before 9/11. I didn't join because 9/11 happened and like, hooah, save America. I joined because I needed money for college. And then 9/11 happened, and then we were in this war that I didn't understand and didn't agree with. And when I claim my veteran status today, it doesn't matter. I feel like, if a white man who is a veteran is saying some of the things that I say, it would be held to such a different standard. Like almost like this moral standard that, when I'm saying it, it's like, oh, well, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter at all. And so I think part of these discussions needs to be that being a veteran means looking like the diverse fabric of America and having this diverse experience, right? A lot of vets that I know come from very difficult backgrounds, as Sean was saying. It's not an easy path for us to claim our veteran status and then be able to actually use it, especially in public office, like we see so many elected officials do in the wrong way, I feel like, right? We see all these ads, where people are blowing up stuff, and no, like I use my veteran status to say, like, I know what it means to serve this country, and I know what it means to call this country out because it isn't living up to the ideals that I believed in when I signed up for. But somehow when I say that, the ideals that I believe in aren't the ideals of white supremacy that the nation was founded on, so my voice isn't valued. And that is really what I've grappled with in you know, as an elected official and as a vet in public office.
Yeah, I'm going to insert myself in this one as well. One of the biggest misconceptions and tropes, I think, among progressives is that veterans are not their constituents, are their people. There's almost like a cognitive block. I mean, for so many reasons, we are actually very much in vein with the progressive agenda, but yet it is really fascinating to me, and I still have a hard time grappling with it when I say to people, progressive veteran. It feels oxymoronic. They're like, what? Like, what does that even mean? Because we have conflated the military, which technically militaries are supposed to be a public good in defense of the people, right? And so it makes sense that many of us feel so twisted up with an institution that has been claimed by the right and corporate looters, an institution that has been has also lost its way, right? Endless wars, a Pentagon that can't pass the most basic checks and balances. We don't know where the money is going. You know, and militarism, right? Like militarism has governed this country for far too long. And militarism to me is the dominance through military violence. You know, really what people want to say is, well, whatever is in the best of, you know, whatever is in the nation's interest, we use the military for. And I often ask, what are the nation's interests? What is the Department of Defense defending, right? And so it makes sense why progressives sometimes feel so conflicted about the institution, but we cannot any longer feel conflicted about the people, right, like us. And the other thing I'll say is, to Artie's point, is there is this conflation of Americanism and veteran status and service and military with white, straight, male, conservative, cis, when we know that this institution actually is one of the most rapidly diversifying institutions, for good reasons or not, that's the reality, right? Trans members enlist at higher rates, exorbitant rates than anyone else. The Latinx population is the most rapidly growing population in the military because it is tied to citizenship, which is unjust, right? But for all of these reasons, those of us that claim to be truly transformative progressives, or people that care about people, right, and people's agendas, cannot just relinquish and cede this mantle. The last thing I'll say is on this is there is also tropes that we are either robots, like we're Harvard flying robots that are hyper productive, or we're completely broken. These binaries have never served anyone and are actually, in my opinion, counter-progressive, right? So where does that leave? I mean, all of us are vets of color, right? Some of us are queer vets. You know, some of us are immigrant connected. And so with that, I'll ask the next question, which is, how do you feel that your military experience, right, being part of the fighting force, the defense force of a country that has been in war for so long, is a significant experience? So how did your experience politicize you or prime you to be an organizer in the fight for justice? And we'll start with Carrie.
If you guys see me boxing, there's a fly in here, so and it keeps flying at my face. But I want to say a couple things before I get to how I got politicized. I want to speak to what Artie mentioned, and there's this idea, there's this tokenism with progressive vets, but specifically progressive vets of color. And as long as you are towing the line, as long as you are agreeing with what is being said, they're like, look at our veteran, this is great, listen to what they have to say, they fought for our country. And then like all of a sudden you hear screeching brakes because you go against it, and suddenly they want to degrade so that they can distance themselves from anything you're saying. And so in that respect, it's not very different than what we see in the rest of America, and it's something that needs to be fixed. But, you know, again, with what politicized me, I've been political my whole life. My family is very much involved, but again, just seeing what war really was, right? Seeing that it was so devastating that, you know, I was aircrew, and how people would literally have to be drug off our aircraft because they just couldn't take another deployment, or that their recruiter lied to them and said that they would have longer before they were ever deployed. And hearing their NCOs yelling at them that you're infantry first, you know, the number of friends that I've lost to suicide, and we're supposed to be considered the easier force, right? The Air Force, and how heavy it was, and just seeing life lost from the eyes of your friends and your family is something that I carry. And then, you know, coming back, and we're talking about American exceptionalism, and I will fight for this country. I even hear now people saying, I'm going to leave for another country. Some folks who are just like, who are like the moderates or the conservatives, oh, I'm leaving if Trump wins again. And I said, I'm staying here until we get it right, right? But I also know that when I traveled overseas, there were some really amazing things that we can learn from other countries that we try to belittle, right? Those same countries that we call second world countries or developing countries. And yet their sense of humanity seems stronger than ours often. And so I knew that when I came back, I had to fight harder here to make us the better place, the place that our parents told us about, that our history classes taught us about, the place that we believed in. But when you go overseas and you see the truth, it's hard to erase that. And at the same time, we fought shoulder to shoulder with people that we might not have ever met, right? But what we usually had in common was a struggling economic background. We came from different parts of the country, but we made it work. We moved the mission. And I fully believe if we took that piece of our experience, we could move forward. And we know that if you look at history, at least in America, a lot of social change started with the military, integration of troops, women working beside men, openly gay people being able to serve and not lose their job, right? Like we took that mantle, but then at some point we forget it. And if it worked there, we can work it in society. And we see that military members are the ones that are saying, let's have universal health care. It just makes sense. I have, and I want my brother and my sister and my mother to have it, right? It's the same thing with housing. Well, we have it, and we could be BAH. It's not like we're quitting and deciding not to work. It just makes sense. So we all have a home. These are very basic things that even people who are active duty or veterans are saying, it works. Why wouldn't we work it? And not putting some title that scares people away. And so that is something that really moves me. And that is when I use my veteran experience to say, and my veteran title to say, wait a minute, but there is a better way, and let me show you.
Powerful, amazing. Sean, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I always felt like I've had these values in me even before I enlisted, but things weren't so clear up until I decided to take both my feet and step into one side of the road. And there's no clarity when, you know, there's your judgment's kind of clouded when you have your feet on both sides of the roads. And I think that when I finally dove in and, you know, enlisted, seeing how, you know, we can't really question our commands and really just go with things how the way they're supposed to be, right? It's just, all right, you got to be, you know, do what you're told, right? You never ask questions because just the way it was. But then that over time, you see how so many of my friends who I've lost either suicide or to combat, and realizing how the wars in Iraq and, you know, most recently the Afghanistan papers, we see how a lot of these wars are based on lies, and you question how can you conceive the fact that I've lost loved ones, close friends to tragic wars, forever wars, based on wars that are built on lies? And this is what we're giving up for. And in return, we're getting breadcrumbs when we get back. We have a lot of veterans who are being deported back to their homes. You know, as you mentioned earlier, Pam, a lot of in the Latinx community, they're enlisting large numbers due to citizenship. But at the same time, when they come back from service, they're being deported from their homes. and we saw that firsthand. We went down to T1. We met veterans who were deported, right? And it was just tragic and heartbreaking. And even as people of color, marginalized members in the armed forces, it was, I feel like that we had to prove ourselves 10 times more than our white counterparts, right? I think that listening at a time where it's post 9/11, you know, being a Muslim, being a person of color, even I had to really try to find the conflict of identifying not only as a veteran later on, but as someone who is a Muslim, where we are fighting in predominantly Muslim countries. And even within the veteran spaces, I see how a lot of my, you know, staff sergeants kind of questioned my allegiance. And that really made me question, like, you know, what is this all about at the end of the day? You know, are we all one, or who are we fighting for, who are we fighting with? And it just really put me in a dark space for quite a while, actually. And there was a period of time where I did not want to be part of the service. There were times where, you know, I even went AWOL for a couple of days just because I need to, you know, clear my head and try to figure things out. But I realized that at the end of the day that this experience one day was gonna work out. It's gonna benefit me somehow, some way, and I could use this as a pathway to you know, try to create the space. So it's been conflicting, but I think that you know, we're gonna figure it out. So
Arti?
Yeah, I mean, going back to your question, Pam, of like what sort of radicalized us. I think that the moment that radicalized me, so my job, my deployment duty when I was in the Army was to do autopsies on people that died in 9/11 and the Afghanistan and Iraq wars. And I was deployed, I worked at the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology in Washington, D.C., and then I deployed to Dover, Delaware. So it was like an hour-and-a-half drive. And anytime we had like a mass, you know, a plane coming over from Iraq or Afghanistan, we went up there and we did the autopsies. And so in the time I was there from, you know, after 2001 to 2005, when I left, we processed over 3,000 remains, and I'm sure that number is low, right? And so I saw people, like, it just made no sense to me. And this obviously because Bush was president at that time and he wasn't allowing pictures of, you know, the flag draped caskets coming off the planes. Nobody really knew what was happening in the war. And I remember being in the, you know, the base hotel rooms and like seeing the stuff on the news and thinking, do people even understand that like 30 people died yesterday in this war? Do people understand that? So because we've had a terrorist attack, and I really go back to Barbara Lee's speech where she was the only person that voted no on the AUMF after 9/11, just because we've had a terrorist attack in our country is really the right action to bomb another country? Is that really how we want to do this? And the thing that really radicalized me, I think, was seeing all of that and for it not making any sense. And we're bombing people that look like me from Afghanistan, right? And I didn't understand it, and I had to exist in that space as a brown person in a very white space and talk like them. And I just felt like I was not a human being. I was operating completely as a robot in that moment. And, you know, it took a while for me after I got out of the military to really find my voice as, like, you know, the person that I am today. But I think for progressives and Democrats especially what I think of now as a South Asian, as a progressive South Asian, it's really important because we've now this week we learned that Kamala Harris is Joe Biden's running mate. Kamala Harris identifies, and her mother is South Asian and her father is Black. It is really important that we as South Asians, progressive South Asians especially, talk about the fact that the Democratic Party has not spoken out unequivocally against the rise of Hindu fascism in America and in India, right? And what is the line that we're going to hold this government to? What is the line that we're going to hold a Biden-Harris government to when it comes to authoritarianism and nationalism, not just in our country, but by other countries that America thinks of as diplomatic partners? And the Obama administration towed a very fine line with that when he went over there, and Senator Harris has spoken out about some of the you know, issues of India and Kashmir, but she hasn't come out and unequivocally stated that the Hindu fascism exhibited by the Modi government is wrong. And the United States won't work with, won't work with India if that continues. We need to fight, not just in our nation for those things, but all around the world. And I think as like a person with so many intersectional identities, it's really important that we speak out as vets for this here at home, but also for other countries as well.
Dang, this is like such a rich discussion. I'll add myself here too, because there's really good through lines here. I think for myself, one of the biggest losses of the progressive movement not more assertively investing in, claiming, building leadership among veterans, in my opinion, is that not only are we not giving real choices around our political power, but we're not really given much space to unpack some of these dynamic, intensive, and timely realities, right? That literally, when this whole conversation are the pieces, right, to assembling an opposition to authoritarianism and nationalism and building a world that is divorced, finally, from the militarism that is killing all of us, frankly. For myself, I mentioned a little bit that my mother, a Honduran immigrant, was the one who asked me to enlist because I'm a product of the school to military pipeline. I was a very smart child, and guidance counselor said to my mom, kids like yours just don't go to college. They don't make it, and there's no real money, So my mom had seen an Air Force commercial, took me to the recruiter's office. Lots of folks don't know this, but I actually wanted to be an artist, and was really resistant to going. I remember the recruiter said, no means numerous opportunities. So no, you didn't smoke weed. No, you don't have undocumented family members. No, right? And I just remember even my entry point was so conflicting because I was told these core values, right? Integrity first, service before self, excellence in all we do. And I really took those to heart when I was a 19-year-old because they reminded me of the way I was raised. I was raised working class with a very diverse, community by a single mother who taught me those core values before I joined the military. Like all of you, I was political before I joined the military. I knew what racism and classism was. So when I joined the most hierarchical institution in our land and saw that my commander isn't necessarily abiding by integrity first when he is sexist. This master sergeant saying racist, xenophobic jokes about immigrants and saying that's part of the mission is not excellence in all we do. And so I was deeply politicized around power. One of the most politicizing, I think, experiences in the military for me was also this question of what are we doing? I was in a training class and we had a Border Patrol agent come in and teach the class. And I remember I had to leave and throw up because it was really painful to hear the dehumanizing way that he was talking about a dead migrant in the desert. And I remember thinking that could have been my mother, that could have been that's my people. And so, we don't talk enough about moral injury and the consciousness raising that happens in this unique, population. And the military taught me the most about power. I think, one of you said, I think it was you, Sean, like who watches the watcher, right? Who holds the commander accountable? And I remember later down the line, I went to grad school and I did a paper around, some paper around how women in the military are, after you have a baby, you're like expected to just like bounce back and like get in PT shape and all of the sexism around that. And one of my classmates in my grad program said, but isn't there like a town hall that you can go to and like complain about your commander? And I was like, hell no, like if you even breathe dissent, like you're gonna get slapped. So, I think many of us have a deep analysis around power. And the last thing I'll say on this is that, the military did train us. I mean, it's really fascinating to me when I think about Standing Rock. When I think about vets for Black lives and vets that are showing up in this moment, you know, Sean and I were part of a group of vets that went to the border, you know, around the crisis with asylum seekers. And it's interesting to me how primed vets are to organize. You know, we understand analytics and strategy and tactics. And so it's an interesting population for movement building. We have 10 more minutes, and so I want to ask my closing question. Especially when we're thinking about, you know, Artie brings up a really important point. There is a challenge right now, right? There's a contest in this country. And I think it's twofold, which is who gets to be an American and who doesn't. I mean, the debate around whether we're in a fascist moment, authoritarian slide moment or not needs to be done. We are there. It is here, right? And who gets to be an American, who gets to be a target of the state as an enemy combatant is very important. When I see the president talking about targeting activists, I wonder if he's also talking about the Black and brown babies in the streets, right? And if he's painting them as the terrorists. And so this gaslighting around militarism, you know, and authoritarianism is one of the contests. And then the second contest, which we have to talk about, is will the Democratic Party keep kind of ceding and kind of like getting close to that? Because even when it's politically salient right now to say, yes, you know, we really need to get rid of white nationalists, but if you say that we're going to do that through more militarism, right? Blue nationalism is not what we want to move to, right? Countries around the world that have multiple parties, not just two parties, you see that there are some parties that are left nationalists, which is not where we want to head, right? And so thinking about all of this, thinking about, you know, the work ahead when it comes to elections, protecting a movement that puts people on the planet first, and our vision of like true global solidarity, right? I want to ask all of you to just leave us with like a directive, right? So we've got folks on here that, you know, are tuning in. And what is your mandate to the progressive movement when it comes to our community and the way forward? And we can start with whoever wants to go first.
I can go first. I think my mandate, and just to address like one of the things that somebody in the question Q&A brought up, is we need to defund the police and we need to defund the military. That is the mandate that I am actively organizing around and working on, right? When you look at how much we spend as a country on the military, we spend more than I think the next 10 largest militaries globally combined. And the military line item, the amount that we spend on the military is the second largest amount of our federal budget. The first biggest spending item on the federal budget is Social Security, as it should be. But then the second biggest amount, which is the tune of like over $700 billion or something, is what we spend on the military. I think it's actually gone up. When you look at how that compares in your local communities, and this is what I would ask everybody to do, right? If you're not fighting at the federal level, you need to be fighting at the local level. Because what the military does overseas, the things that the military tries out on Black, brown, and predominantly Muslim countries overseas, the surveillance methodologies, they all come back here to your local communities. And Chicago is a really great example of that, because we have some unrest in Chicago right now. And what is the non-progressive Lori Lightfoot doing in Chicago? Well, she is militarizing the police in Chicago, and she's using military-style tactics to exacerbate existing inequities based on where people live. She's actually lifting up bridges so that people can actually get to, you know, different parts of the city. She's using social media combing to find out where people are. All of these things are things that the military does. And so it's hard to fight at the federal level. We have a huge fight ahead of us, but at the local level, the impact is so great that somebody could have, and this is why I ran for local office, right? So start organizing locally. Ask how much your city, your village, whatever, spends on police, and ask why they spend so much on police and where does that money go? And do they accept military equipment from the federal government? Because if they do, you should really stop that. So I think that is like, there are so many tie-ins to what we see happening nationally to what we're seeing happen locally. And we need to become more aware of that, and then we need to fight against it.
I think that's a great point. You know, my biggest mandate right now is to really, I believe that we really need to really look at just beyond the presidential election 2020. There's a really important position that's coming up also in November, and that's for the chair for the Foreign Affairs Committee. You know, Elliot Engel, who's been there for I think 30 plus years, was defeated by Jamal Bowman. And Engel he was a war hawk, right? And I think that it's not enough to have a new Democrat, whoever that may be, to come in with very similar positions. And, you know, I think that it's really upon us to really call on Congress to make our voices heard, at least to let them know that who we want. You know, I'm supporting Joaquin Castro, who is running for that seat, just because a lot of his policies are based on progressive policies that are based on anti-war, decolonizing a lot of these nations that we've been in for centuries now. So I think that it's a really important position that we should all really pay attention to.
So for me, there's a couple of things. I urge you to re-educate yourself on so many things, so that you understand what we're fighting for, from being an anti-racist to foreign policy, understanding what people mean with certain taglines that sound great but aren't that wonderful. And as you're dealing with folks who are having their progressive coming out as troops, try not to make it emotional. You know, don't make it something that they have to say, yeah, I remember the first time I was in a progressive circle and I let them know that I was a Marine or an airman, or, you know what I mean? Like, instead say, well, what have you learned and what can you bring? Because we have a lot that we can offer, just like anyone else in the movement. And so the sooner that we make a place for veterans, the sooner that we can move whole communities, because communities believe in vets. It's what it is. And some people have heard me say this, but I stay away from the term progressive because it's been hijacked, right? And so I encourage you to look for candidates and community workers, and folks who are calling themselves community leaders, and asking them, and, you know, determining if they're people-centered. It's easy to say progressive and say, well, we had to do this, but you can't call yourself people-centered and then not be able to justify that your policy or your work in the community is not actually helping the people, right? And so I encourage you to judge any candidate or community leader based off how people-centered they are, not if they call themselves progressives. And then finally, I am in line with Artie on this. We need to find a better way to use military budgets, right? And again, in the same way I'm saying people-centered, troop-centered. If the budgets aren't troop-centered, then they're not the right budgets. And troop-centered also includes making sure that their hometowns, their communities, where their families, like their spouses and their kids, their moms and their dads, their brothers and their sisters, are properly funded with equitable education, universal health care, safe housing, right? That is affordable, to make sure that they have clean air and water. And those things can be done if we choose to reallocate the funds and make sure that when our troops are serving overseas, and oftentimes, again, as I said before, that aren't for our country, but for those who want to be served, that the last thing that's on their mind is the well-being of their friends and family. And that is truly supporting the troops. That is something, if you do that alone, you will never have to say thank you for your service, because we will know that you are truly thankful of our service. So yeah, and I guess I don't know if we have time for other questions, or we're at the end, huh,
Pam? Yeah, well, we've covered most of the questions that have been asked. All of those are amazing. I think, yeah, I'm like having a moment because I've wanted to do this panel for 3 years, and this was really rich and amazing. I've been organizing for the last few months around the Vanessa Guillen case, the Latina soldier who went missing. There was criminal negligence around her disappearance and then was found murdered. The point that Carrie makes is really personal to me. We as the left, we as the multiracial coalition that will dismantle racism and militarism and corruption in this country and in this world, cannot be afraid that our vision and our agenda will be seen anti-troop. Again, I agree with the co-option of progressive, but the progressive agenda in its core value actually puts working people first, and soldiers and Marines and airmen, especially enlisted, especially people of color, queer and trans folks, are workers. And the added rub is when you give that oath as a young person, you don't have rights anymore. Even when you file an IG complaint, as I did, it is not a real system. The UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice, is rigged against us. And so one of my biggest mandates is that I often hear, there's just not an anti-war movement right now. Like it just doesn't exist. And it will not exist if we don't claim our responsibility around these issues. We can no longer just cede the mantle, and we can no longer, the American public, including those who never served, we all have a responsibility. And blind adulation of generals and the military is one of the biggest rots in our society. I personally see top military generals no different from corporate tech billionaires. I see them. The military industrial complex is generals playing golf with their congressperson, and then you have all these deaths at Fort Hood and there's no one asking questions, right? And I can't fathom those young people, other Latinas on that base right now, and who fights for them. We are also deserving of champions. And I'm excited that there are transformative champions, many of them, candidates that actually put the people on planet first, that are saying, I actually also care about vets, and I want to have an anti-war party, because these issues are our issues. One question that was asked, and it will just take one or two voices, because some of you already answered it. One question was, talk about how important it is to reduce the military budget, and importantly, invest money in diplomacy and domestic policy issues that benefit the American people at home. Another question is suggestions for how to reach out to veterans and energize them around progressive politics. Susan focuses on purple, highly polarized congressional districts where the military base is a big employer. So those are two, if anyone wants to take them in our last 8 minutes.
I mean, I don't live in a purple district, but I will say in reaching out to vets, I think when I initially started doing this work, which was with Pam, I was like, this is going to be really hard, because as a veteran, most vets don't like to talk about, we are trained as vets to be sort of apolitical. I remember when I was in the military, speaking out against the war was something that you couldn't do even if you didn't believe in it. And I remember saying one thing like negative about it, and a sergeant like nearly punched me as a result of it. And so I think what we have to do is ask, what I always ask vets is like, the benefits that we got in the military are the same benefits that people should have outside, right? The life, the sort of comfort that we had when we had universal health care. I never had to pay. I had a baby in the military, never paid a single bill for that baby. But then when I get out, I think I paid over $2,000 to have a baby on the outside with health insurance, right? Why is that different? Why are those experiences different? And why have we created a military industrial complex to give the American people what they should have without it? And so if you this is how I approach people, is just policy. Ayanna Pressley says policy is my love language. And I think that's really the love language of how to reach out to people, is people are smarter than we give them credit for. And if you meet the people where they are, which is talk about their problems, talk about their issues, don't assume that, they know, they don't care about stuff, which is what I hear all the time, that young people don't care. Like, I hear that all the time. Young people don't care. And I have a young person in my house. She's 18. She cares about a lot of stuff, but she also hates the fact that older people say young people don't care. So that turns them off, right? Meet people where they are, meet veterans where they are, and bring them along with you, right? That is the role of a community organizer. But also, as a community organizer, I would say that there are always going to be a group of people that will never come along with you. Don't focus on them because your time is limited. So bring along the people that are willing to have a conversation.
I agree with what was said, and we have to remember, as progressives or people-centered folks, the grassroots are, we always are saying that we care about people. We want to reach out to the marginalized groups. When it comes to veterans, we know we're a very small portion of the population, but during the 2016 election, the Democrats dropped the ball, right? And I'm a member of the DNC, I'm a voting member of the DNC, and they dropped the ball. We had hardly any people doing voter outreach for veterans, and the Republicans killed it, right? They were out there and they were making sure that veterans felt heard and included. And it really was what swung the election, at least the electoral votes, right? And so we need to really consider what that means. And if there are so many, I know that there are other veterans who feel like we feel, but they're not feeling heard. They're not feeling like they have a home. And if we give them that home, we can turn elections for the right thing. And we can encourage the rest of the population to participate more and feel like they are fighting for the right things. I'll tell you, when I was pushing healthcare in South Carolina, I remember how many, when you went to Charleston, where the Air Force Base was, every person that was serving was like, yes, we need universal health care, right? When you would go to other places and they were hesitant, and you explained that the airmen in Charleston believed in it, they're like, oh, right, there's a difference. And we can really change what it means to be a veteran and what it means to serve our communities differently by encouraging them to vote for policies and candidates that really reflect their needs and their ideas.
Yeah, and I'll just say, don't be afraid to have uncomfortable conversations, difficult conversations with people who may have different perspectives from you. I think it's really important to have a dialogue, all while trying to hold on to your values. And I think that as a people-centered movement, I think that it's really important for us to really open up an avenue for us to change the hearts and souls and minds of the people in this country. This country is built on arguments, so many different experiences and perspectives, but I think that we can definitely, especially as veterans, we can definitely change the minds of people because of us knowing how to organize. I think that people do look up to that. We're able to do that. And, coming from where I'm come from, I live in a strong blue district, and we see a lot of veterans who are organizing around the communities, and people do look up to veterans to organize. So I think that veterans are the future for the Democratic Party. So yeah, let's just continue to have these conversations and make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, the point about enfranchisement in my field work, one of the strongest things I've realized, so the military connected base, which is veterans, active service people and their families, which could be brothers, sisters, parents, and children, are among the most consistent voting base. And yet in my field work, when I talk to vets all across this country, most of them say that they feel like they are political orphans, that neither party, and that's how many Americans feel, right? The two-party system leaves little to no room for my actual dreams and desires. I don't feel listened to. In fact, there's little to any infrastructure or data on military voters, even though we are one of the most trusted messengers in American society. And so these hypocrisies really weigh on this constituency. And when I ask vets, tell me about your political heroes or your political values, many actually won't say Democrat or Republican. They talk about justice. They talk about equity and liberty and freedom and the opportunity we all have and I see actually veterans with a high appetite for this, is we must codify what freedom for everyone means. What does collective liberation mean? What does justice actually mean? Because the divide and conquer racist strategies have really hurt the veteran base. And so that's the opportunity that we have. And the last thing I'll say is on this before we leave, ask. Lots of veterans, particularly women, women of color, vets of color, queer and trans folks, the folks that my project Vets for the People is most, developing into leaders, they won't tell you that they're veterans off the bat. Most vets that are invested and engaged in progressive politics won't actually tell you. So build it and they will come, right? Ask about veterans issues because those folks will actually, they need to be asked in order to identify. So yeah, with that, I want to thank our amazing, amazing panelists. This has been the most rich discussion, so timely and needed. And I'm so thankful to be in the trenches with all of you. I feel so hopeful for our future, even though there's a lot of things to unbuild, decolonize, and rebuild. But yeah, thank you all, and thanks all that joined in.
Thank you, Pam.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.